Good evening, and boy, do we have a special episode today. To start with, this man right here is Mr. George Soros, the 91-year-old financier who set up the Open Society Foundation and endowed it with billions of dollars, which eventually flowed into many left-wing causes around the entire world. However, despite the fact that Mr. George Soros' money is behind many of the groups that we see today in the news, there is, you can say, a fascinating phenomenon that occurs when you actually say that fact out loud. The weird trend in today's public discourse is such that when you just mention the name George Soros, you are automatically either placed into the realm of a conspiracy theorist or you're labeled as being anti-Semitic, which in my view is incredibly weird because I remember coming to work one day back in October of 2017, and on the table right there was that day's issue of the Wall Street Journal. So I picked it up, and right there on the front page, above the fold, it said that George Soros had transferred the bulk of his wealth into the Open Society foundations. He transferred $18 billion into his foundation. And after reading that, I thought to myself, wow, there will be a lot of news coverage regarding this. This is going to be a big deal, and finally people will talk about it. And yet, not really. Not too many people talked about it after that issue went away. Think about that, though. George Soros made perhaps one of the biggest transfers to a foundation in all of American history, and yet, besides that article in the Wall Street Journal, I did not see many people talking about it. Furthermore, it soon became obvious to me that people were not even allowed to talk about it, because very soon after that $18 billion transfer to his foundation, across the entire country, district attorneys that were backed by George Soros were getting elected left and right. In fact, according to a recent report, George Soros-backed prosecutors run half of America's largest jurisdictions. But as this wave of Soros-backed DAs were coming to power, well, there was an incredibly awkward interview with Newt Gingrich over on Fox News. And the moment that Newt Gingrich, who of course is the former Speaker of the House, the moment he dared to mention that George Soros' money had put a bunch of district attorneys into office, well, the host of that program, well, just watch for yourself.
Yeah, look, the number one problem in almost all these cities is George Soros elected left-wing, anti-police, pro-criminal district attorneys who refuse to keep people locked up. Just yesterday, they put somebody back on the street who's wanted for 2 different murders in New York City. You cannot solve this problem, and both Harris and Biden have talked very proudly about what they call progressive district attorneys. Progressive district attorneys are anti-police, pro-criminal, and overwhelmingly elected with George Soros' money, and they're a major cause of the violence we're seeing because they keep putting the violent criminals back on the street.
I'm not sure we need to bring George Soros into this.
I was going to say you get the last word, Speaker.
He paid for it. I mean, why can't we discuss the fact that millions of dollars he spent?
I agree with Melissa. George Soros doesn't need to be a part of this conversation.
Okay. So it's verboten.
All right, we're going to.
And right there, as soon as I saw that clip, I knew that this interview had revealed a small truth about our political and social landscape. What happened there on Fox News gave a tiny, tiny insight into who truly holds power in our society. And in fact, it reminded me of this famous quote from Mr. Voltaire. If you want to know who controls you, look at who you're not allowed to criticize. And right there, in that interview, as plain as day, was the person that you were not allowed to criticize. One of the wealthiest people in the world, who quite literally donated billions of dollars to his left-wing foundation, which was then funding the campaigns of radical prosecutors across the entire nation, and you were not even allowed to say his name. If you said his name, well, you saw what would happen. And so, in order to get an idea of, for one, why exactly George Soros is focusing on district attorneys, as well as how it exactly came to be that the media in this country covers up almost all of his involvement in politics, I took the opportunity to speak with Mr. Matt Palumbo, an investigative journalist, as well as the author of the book, The Man Behind the Curtain, Inside the Secret Network of George Soros. And I asked him exactly those questions. Take a listen.
Soros realized, well, that's true of media as well. If you tell people what to expect, they're going to reinterpret reality in that effect. We saw this during the George Floyd protests, where we were all told if we leave our houses, we're killing grandma because of COVID, and then we're all watching what I think it might have been as much as 30 million people took to the streets, and we're going, well, this can't be good for COVID. And then as that's happening, all these articles are coming out going, all right, so listen, there might be a spike in COVID cases in 2 weeks, but here's the real reason. Knowing that these dumb liberals obviously don't want to believe they're responsible, but so they'll go, oh, this complete nonsensical reason, that's the real reason that coincides with all us screaming outside. So yeah, so that's a big thing, is just setting the narrative. I mean, the biggest one, and I think you'll probably ask about this, because I get asked this in every question, is how the heck is it that we can't criticize George Soros? You know, comedians are always saying, you know, you're supposed to, or liberals are always saying, like, about comedians, oh, you got to punch up, you can't punch down. Well, this is punching up. He's got, over his lifetime, made $40 billion and has an enormous amount of influence, and had 500 A-list celebrities at his wedding. So I would think he's fair game. And what he's taken advantage of is just this sort of narrative where any disagreement of the left is categorized as racism. And he's lucky because he gets his own category of racism. He can say it's anti-Semitic, which is often viewed as even worse than just general racism, just given the recentness of the Holocaust, which he played no role in preventing. So that's his main thing. And in the media chapter of the book, I have a list of publications that are linked to Soros. The way I link it, and I didn't want it to be like he knows a guy who knows a guy. I made it where if you are on a group that gets a significant amount of Soros money, but ideally literally a Soros group, and you're on the board, and then you're also work for a media organization, I say you're Soros linked, and just go on any of the publications that are Soros linked: ABC, CBS, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times. I mean, the list is a very long list. Type in Soros's name and just look at how they cover him. And it's always, if it's ever anything negative, it's anti-Semites say negative claim, or it's a very common theme of the media. It's always framed as the right-wing outrage over them doing something wrong, to try to make it seem like, oh, well, it can't be that big a deal, but just get a load of these people who are upset about it. So that's just another reframing technique that's been very big. And in this case, it's been to say criticizing Soros is somehow anti-Semitic, even though he's not a practicing Jew. And I would be surprised if more than 50% even knew he was Jewish. I don't think that's the first thing anyone looks up on a person, but what do I know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really a brilliant strategy. You have this idea that you want to get out into the world. You have this worldview that you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. You control the leaders of the people on the ground. Yeah. Then they do something, but what's reported is reported by the media, yeah, who you also control. Yeah. And that narrative then, yeah, translates back down to the people who are actually on the, yeah, ground doing what they're doing. There
are even journalism watchdogs, like the Columbia Journalism Review, that Soros is linked to and he gives money to. So even the watchdogs of the journalists are in many cases Soros funded.
Can you give us some concrete examples? How is it specifically that George Soros has so many of people that are linked to him inside of the media? Can you give us like a few concrete examples of how that plays out? Let's say like within the New York Times, you said that there are people linked to George Soros. What does that actually look like?
It would just be, so we have, okay, suppose I'm on an Open Society Foundation board, or I'm on a board of a company that gets the majority of its funding from the Open Society Foundation. I then also have either currently or at some point later in my life then go work for CNN or CBS. So it's just, I've taken Soros money before, either currently or in the past. Now I work for media, and it's inevitable they're going to be reporting on this guy. It's sort of like, and Glenn Greenwald, I think, or actually I might even Noam Chomsky, ironically, who obviously I'm not a fan of, but he made the point, like in media, when the media is dictating control, it doesn't have to be me going, hey, you work for me, you say this. It's you respond to incentives. If you work at a publication, they might not tell you what to report, but you might just notice, okay, people who report on these issues get promoted and people who report on these kind of get sidelined. Similar thing there. It's sort of an implied contract where I've gotten money from this guy before. Am I really going to badmouth him in my report? And a lot of people just choose not to. Plus, they're ideologically benefit from portraying him as just a right-wing boogeyman, because if you can dismiss any of his funding as that, then you don't have to really address it. And that happens to me with the book too. It's just you're promoting a boogeyman, and I'm going, well, I have the list here, but they don't want to listen.
Yeah, one example that I thought you gave in the book that elucidated this point quite well is ProPublica.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. What's this? Of course it's secure, because we use the Sekur app, which is the sponsor of today's episode, as well as an awesome email and message service provider that actually cares about your privacy. Now listen, it's no big secret that our data is being mined and remined all the time. In fact, there was a recent study that was published in the year 2020, which found that 155 million Americans, likely including you and me, have suffered some form of data breach. And frankly, that's only what's publicly known. However, all those past problems with privacy issues and data mining, well, that can be an issue of the past, because moving forward, you can use the Sekur app, which both your messages, your emails, and your phone calls can remain private. That's because they have their servers and their data centers located in Switzerland instead of in the US or China or Russia. And why does that matter? Because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the entire world, and they are not subject to the intrusive Cloud Act. Now, what I love the most about the Sekur app is that they don't collect my data, they don't mine my data, they don't mine the data and phone numbers of my friends and family. Everything is private. And best of all, at least in my opinion, this does not work with your big tech email provider just because it is not secure. And so check it out. You can head on over to sekur.com, and if you use promo code Roman, you can get 25% off. And frankly, their rates are not even that expensive. It only starts with $5 for the messenger and $10 for the email and messenger combo. And best of all, they offer a 7-day free trial.
I could go on that if you want. Yeah, so they did a very lengthy report on billionaires not paying taxes. And to be fair, it was kind of a BS report. It was just, hey, they have a ton of stock, the stock went up, they didn't pay tax on it. Well, they don't pay tax until they sell. So you can build in a deferred tax into their net worth. But what was interesting about the report is you read every person. You got Bill Gates, you got Zuckerberg, you got Bezos, a couple thousand words, at least more than 500 words per person, very in-depth. Here's what they own, here's why not. You get to George Soros, and there's like one full paragraph, and then like a 2 or 3 sentence paragraph. The first paragraph is saying, okay, he paid no tax from these years. However, his representative, and I don't recall him having representatives reach out from the other people, but his did, says, oh, we didn't make money because we didn't pay taxes because our fund didn't make any money that year. Now, Soros' fund is big enough. If you make more than $100 million a year, if you manage more than $100 million, you have to report with the SEC. So anyone can just look up his profit and loss, and he turned a profit those years. So they didn't even do, I mean, I'm sure they did do the due diligence, but didn't report it. But they made no mention of the fact that that excuse was a lie. I mean, the real reason was, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, he donated 18 or 19 billion to himself, and that gave him a write-off for 5 years. So he didn't have to pay any tax, but they didn't, I guess, want to admit that.
And how was ProPublica, who reported this story, connected to George Soros?
Oh, yes, so he accounts for about 2% of their funding, and they've actually dismissed allegations that he plays any role by going, well, he only controls 2% of our funding, and well, apparently that's a significant amount, enough to change your coverage and not to do basic due diligence. So.
Well, 2% of
a company. If you hired 2% of McDonald's, you'd have quite a bit of influence. So if it's anything really.
So we talked about the Open Society in regards to media. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Open Society in regards to politicians and political campaigns. So there's been a lot of talk recently about George Soros DAs, right? Can you lay that out? Why? Well, first of all, which cities did he install DAs? What does him installing DAs look like? And then furthermore, why is he targeting DAs?
Actually, I'll start with the reason why he's targeting them. And it's really the easiest way to get policy reform done, because if you want, let's say, less bail, more lenient sentencing, you want these crimes prosecuted and these not, I mean, to do that through legislation is quite a process. You have to do everything individually. You're going to get a lot of opposition. If you elect a DA, they have total autonomy on all those things. So it's just, hey, I want the law changed. I back a guy who wants to change it exactly the way I do. He goes in, he changes it overnight. So one of the weirdest things actually about this whole DA thing is these prosecutors are household names. In a country where most people don't even know their representative, sadly enough, or their mayor, but they know who Chase Boudin is in San Francisco, or Amir Ayala in Florida, with the McCloskeys, the family that had the iconic photo of them with the guns. Rachel Rollins in Massachusetts, who is, I don't think she's as well known, but trust me, completely insane. Kim Fox in Chicago with, notably got the Jesse Smollett charge dropped, and then, that went from there. But the whole chapter, I make it like almost like baseball stats, where I just have, here's the guy, here's how much money they got, here's what they campaigned on, and here's the results. And it's really the same story in every case, except maybe one I found was just an anti-death penalty guy, but not otherwise radical. But everyone else was radical in a very much a similar vein, a similar theme. So Soros, in presidential elections, he donates hundreds of millions, but there's billions of dollars being spent, so it's harder to move the needle. But when you're in a DA race and there's a couple $100,000 spent in each person normally, and then you drop 1 or 2 million, it actually does. You actually can buy an election that way, and it's happened time and time again. In fact, there are cases where the challenger just drops out because they know there's no point. But it's so. For instance, like Chase Boudin in San Francisco, the weekend crime philosophy, it's always misrepresented as, well, hey, we don't want people going to jail for smoking pot, or hey, some people need mental health treatment, or hey, I mean, people might be feeding their families, so we don't put them in jail. And some of it may sound good on paper, but it's just in practice, it's not what happens. In practice, we see cases where clearly violent and mentally ill people will not even face bail. I mean, these people are places are doing out with bail entirely, and then they just go out and reoffend. Or in many cases in San Francisco have gone on and killed people. In fact, the entirety of the spike in hate crimes against Asians is attributable to Jason Boudin's policies. And in many cases, it's a very concentrated problem of these repeat offenders who they will not put in jail, just doing it again and again and again. Kim Gardner is another one where we have a case where Black Lives Matter activists break into a gated community, so they broke the law doing that. They're threatening to murder this couple as they're outside their house. They grab guns, which I don't even know if they were loaded or operational. I can't remember that detail. But a very common theme of these activists is they view criminals as the real victims. You'll see this like on a social media post. Someone's robbing a Chanel store, and some liberals going, "Well, they might be feeding their family." And I'm going, "With that? Like, sorry guys, I don't buy it in that case. If they're stealing bread, I might buy it." But that's one of the things where the victims themselves become the criminals. And one thing that comes to mind recently was there was this viral video of a woman getting attacked in the New York subway, and people were saying, well, why isn't anyone going to help? Was it like a death of masculinity? And I'm saying, well, that could be a role, but it could also be the case that if you intervene, somehow you're portrayed as the bad guy. You're the one who faces consequences. I mean, there are countries like the UK where if you defend yourself with even a toy gun, if someone breaks into your house, you'll also be charged. So it's a breakdown of law and order we're seeing, and almost every single one of these cities, and defund the police has been very big with these people. We've seen pretty much a doubling in crime just in 2020 through 2021. There's really no sign of things slowing down. And then all these little quality of life things that you don't even really think about, just not having a homeless camp outside of your home, not having graffiti everywhere, not having public drunkenness. These things are just becoming more and more common and more accepted, and then the activists just dismiss it as, oh, well, this is proof we need more housing shelters. Every negative consequence they create is reframed as, here's why we need to do some left-wing policies. We see this in San Francisco, where they don't build any houses, and then so they have all these homeless people, and they go, well, we need to build more public housing, where it's going to cost them like $1 million per person. And it's just their own policies perpetuate the need for more of the same policies that do nothing.
Let me ask you this. So as you were going through all those examples, I wonder, because George Soros is not, and I'm sure Alexander Soros, they're not dumb people. I mean...
No, he's a very smart guy, which is unfortunate for us.
He can see these effects. He can see what's happening on the ground, and yet he continues to push in this direction. Do you think that and so I guess my question is twofold. One is, does he not care, for one? Or two, is the goal the chaos, so that out of the chaos, something new can emerge and replace the system of the U.S.? I
think that's it. I mean, I've been trying to speculate overall what's the goal of the defund the police movement, because one of the things I've noticed, and I'm surprised this hasn't been reported more, is that a lot of these places that defunded the police have at least partially refunded them in recent years, but they've done so quietly. They haven't mentioned it at all. So it's they want to accommodate activists by doing something crazy. They realize it's insane, this can't go on, and then they refund it quietly. So they know something's up. So I'm going, so why are politicians still pushing it? And one theory, and I don't know if this ties with Soros in particular, but one theory for why they would push to fund the police is an effort to federalize the police, to give states less autonomy. And in fact, there was recently an anti-lynching bill that sort of served that goal, where lynchings are now federal crimes. And there were liberals talking about it as if lynching was legal up until that point. And it's like, no, we have laws against murder that falls into that category. It's a state offense. There's no need to make it more than it is. But one of the consequences is it does make it federal. And I'm wondering, is that the goal with everything else? Just federalize the police, give less autonomy to the states. It would be the more globalist thing to do. I mean, that is... we're almost a mini EU, where the federal government's our EU, and we're our own little sovereign states to some extent, and that's antithetical, even that, to Soros' philosophy.
Now, what you just watched was a short snippet from the entire interview, which for your reference was about a full hour long. And in the full interview, we went through George Soros' childhood, or how he became the man he is today, his philosophy and the true goals that he is attempting to achieve through his Open Society Foundation, how exactly the foundation doles out funding, how he has been working to change our election system, how much real influence Soros currently has over our government, as well as the trifecta of funding between the media, the different left-wing organizations on the ground, as well as the government class that all works together to push the agenda forward. However, in the full interview, we went into some topics that unfortunately cannot be discussed on a platform like YouTube. Despite the fact that everything we talked about was properly sourced and properly predicated, well, frankly, it doesn't matter. That's just the reality of the world we live in. And so if you'd like to check out that awesome interview in its glorious entirety, you can do so over on Epoch TV, our no censorship video platform. The link to that full interview will be right there at the very top of the description box. I hope you check it out. And now, in closing, I wanted to leave you with a quote from one of our founding fathers that, quite frankly, rings as true today as it must have about 250 years ago. This is what Mr. John Adams, who served as the second president of the United States of America, wrote in his dissertation on the canon and feudal law. Quote, "Be not intimidated, therefore, by any terrors from publishing with the utmost freedom whatever can be warranted by the laws of your country, nor suffer yourselves to be wheeled out of your liberties by any pretenses of politeness, delicacy, or decency. These, as they are often used, are but three different names for hypocrisy, chicanery, and cowardice." And indeed, in the year 2022, as we're seeing more and more of our fundamental rights being curtailed, including, of course, the freedom of speech, that's exactly the advice that my team and I are taking to heart when, among many other things, we expose the machinations behind the Open Society Foundation. And I hope that you take it to heart as well. Share this video out to as many people as possible so that they can know what's going on behind the scenes as well. And again, if you want to watch this interview in its entirety regarding George Soros, the link will be right there at the very top of the description box. You can click on it, watch it, and then maybe share that video with your friends and family as well. And then until next time, be not intimidated by any terrors and never relinquish your liberties under any pretenses of politeness, delicacy, or decency. And instead, as our forefathers did, remain always free.